Now hear those who were involved in making it come to life. Join us as we go behind the door.
Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Door with the Grey Rooms podcast. I'm your host, Brooks Bigley, and with me tonight is the author of Season 3, Episode 8, Natalie Brown, who cooks up a delightful tale that will satisfy your midnight snack cravings. How are you this evening, Natalie?
I am so great. I'm happy to be here. How are you tonight?
Well, I'm definitely not hungry right now because I just listened to your story again about an hour and a half ago. So I think I'll wait till later to start cooking dinner. And even then, I already kind of have an idea of what I'm going to be cooking. So, Natalie, what inspired you to write the recipe for this story?
Well, I was working overnight at a gas station when I was pregnant with my third son, and I was listening to creepypastas, and there was a story called Drool by author Marcus Demanda, and that it was completely different, but it inspired the entire idea. And I had just become, pregnant with my third son. And it took me back to remembering when I was pregnant with my second son. And the whole idea behind the story is so wholesome, really. Like, I can remember being pregnant with my second son and looking at my first child and like seeing how gorgeous he was, and how beautiful, and not being able to understand or being afraid that I wouldn't, like how I loved my first son with my whole heart. How would I be able to split that with another baby? And what I didn't realize was the more children that we have, it's almost like our heart grows new pieces. We're not diluting anything. And what led me to the connection with the mother and Nolan, the son. And it had a lot to do with the sacrifice that she makes at the end to be with her family.
That's beautiful. I because I have two kids, and I felt the same thing after my firstborn, which was just like a miracle and just the best thing to ever happen. Then we had a second. I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna love this second one? So I totally understand that tug of war that you would play, or you think that you would play, before you actually start to raise your children together. But you're saying you felt this about your third child or your second child?
I thought it about my second child, but when I listened to Marcus's story, it sparked, even though it's completely different. It's about a woman that has surgery. She's a tongue surgery recipient, so completely different ballgame. But something about it, I was sitting in my car, and I was in the middle of the night. It was this really, really slow gas station. I just got done sweeping up, and I was a little bit tired. So I sat in my car and stuff and waited for people to come in, listening to podcasts. And something about it, I sat there rubbing my belly, and I remembered how scared I felt when I was pregnant with my second child, and how after I gave birth to him. So it wasn't about the actual child that I was pregnant with, but it all related to the same. Because the message in my mind was the same. Like, you're going to grow an extra chamber of your heart when you look at this child and when you hold this child, and you're going to be able to do it. And, you're going to be great for all, because, all mothers and fathers are like scared, like even the ones that have 6, 7 children, it's such a big change.
Of course.
So it just kind of took me back there mentally. And then I was like, well, I was worried about my second son, and then I had him and I fell in love with him and everything was fine. And I swear to God, now he could get away with murder. And then I thought about that, and I was like, oh, okay. And he was going through a thing where he didn't like to eat meat if it wasn't chicken nuggets or ramen flavored noodles, which is terrible. It's better now. Like, he'll eat like steak and like fried chicken and stuff like that. But when I wrote the story, he was very, 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 very picky. And I can remember my husband actually, we made chicken fried steak because we got a new fryer for like a holiday, and we tried chicken fried steak in it because it's one of my husband's favorite meals. And the same thing happened. I mean, obviously, he didn't like voraciously start demanding food and, like proverbially pounding on the table with his fork and knife. I want meat.
Feed
But he
me.
liked it. And we were so shocked. We're like, what? And
How old was he?
He was about 3 or 4, I would say. He was a very, very old 3 or a very, very new 4 when this had happened. Because my kids are all 4 years apart, so that would, he was about 3, maybe 4. But everything in that story pretty much came from a place of, I know it's supposed to be spooky and I sound like I'm like giving a Hallmark Channel interview. Like, it'll get dark, felt like people, I promise it'll get dark. But everything in that story was personal. All the little details, like the little bear that little Nolan had that he no longer needed anymore after he became a little cannibalistic monster. Was a Fuggler bear. One of those, they came out, they're named Fuggler, and they're these little bears, and they have these little realistic looking teeth all in their mouth. And my son had gotten one, and he's like, what? And he was kind of terrified of it. So we had to make up this story, this little like ugly duckling unsung hero story about this bear so he wouldn't be afraid of it. And that was included in the story as well. I wish I could tell you how it got dark. It just kind of, I guess something about like my personality. Maybe there's some, I don't know. I'm just, I'm horror author material. Like I take inspiration from everything. But the husband's name is Dan, and I got that because everybody, when my husband and I were dating before we had kids, they always said that we were like Dan and Roseanne Connor. So that's why I named the husband Dan. And yeah.
I grew up watching that show, so I vibe with that.
I was down with it. And then we had our first son, and I was like, oh, okay, well, there's no Becky. And then the second son was, well, no, there's no Darlene. So we had to forge our own sitcom kind of family here, and we're doing pretty good.
There you go. Well, I really enjoyed this story because you put so much humanness into it. You touched on so many different, I think, points of parenthood. The fear of not having a child, wanting to, but not getting, that beginning portion of, the sadness of getting the clothes, but then not having the baby to put the clothes in. You kind of captured the different moments that lots and lots of people go through trying to have children, and then having the child, and then having the second child. And then the thing at the flea market with Nolan, getting lost per se, or at least the panic that the mom feels about that. Like, you did a great job again of like humanness, bringing the horror out of the humanness of everyday life. And that's really why we appreciate all of these stories that we get here at the Grey Rooms, because it's just not about these big scary monsters, even though Nolan ultimately was some kind of cute little monster. But also you can see that you put your heart into the story. Like, I knew right away, oh, she's a mom. This isn't just her just writing a story about what she thinks a mother and a son would go through. So you really captured the great, even though we were talking about the light still, you captured, I guess, the beginnings of what would ultimately become this horror story as it slid into the dark. So then what caused that? How did you go from, I'm going to make this story about this child and this mother? How did you then start to piece together how it was going to ultimately reveal the dark side and how you're going to get to the climax of the story?
I tried to do it skillfully, but I took my base concerns as a parent, like a plethora of them. We have the fear of inadequacies about not being able to have children, which it took my husband and I 4 years to have our first son, and then they just didn't stop. Like, after that, it just didn't stop coming. Like, no more babies, like no more. But we tried really hard to have our first one. So I was able to understand and capture that. And then the joy of having something that your heart wants so bad and accepting them. Are you able to accept your child? The true base of unconditional love And I captured that. And then there's the fear of, I had Nolan got lost at the flea market for a little bit. And then, even as someone who wrote the story, I cannot tell you what happened in those 5 to 7 minutes that he was missing. But the child that came back, the entity that came back, was not her little boy. That is a huge fear. Two compounded in one, the fear of losing your kid. And then there's that fear that you have that even if it's for a split second when you don't see your child in your immediate surroundings, that you will never see them again. And she got her child back, but she never saw that little boy again. Her little guy, like he was gone, replaced with this child that she still loved, but ultimately didn't recognize. And, for her husband, it's kind of harder because he was gone all the time, like working and stuff like that. But she was home with these kids and she knew everything, like their little ticks. So I'm like, okay, I fed on the unconditional love, and especially with the second child and what he ends up doing to his little brother. And like just the sounds. My husband has misophonia, and
Oh
so
no.
like yeah, it was terrible. I have to eat cereal in like the corner wrapped up in comforters, like of the closet. Like so Fruity Pebbles are the worst because they can't get stuck to the bowl. But anyway, so when the little boys, our little boys were babies, they made all kinds of mouth noises, like all kinds of, disgustingly dreadful ASMR noises. And it drove him crazy. So that is what inspired. I'm like, okay, well, what can you hear over a baby monitor? Because the trope of someone hacking the baby monitor and like saying demonic things to the baby or like, terrorizing your child, that is absolutely, utterly terrifying. But it's been done a lot that I have known and that I have read and listened to and experienced. So I was like, okay, what else can you hear over a baby monitor? And I thought of my poor husband and all the little mouth noises and sounds that, I teach the little kids to like help teach them how to talk and how their mouth works, but also how to irritate their dad when he gets sassy. Um, but
Good
it's
mom,
not
good
very
mom.
nice. I know.
No, it's totally nice. You got to get your digs in somehow. Come on. I'm sure he does things too.
And I was like, wow, the squelching. And I'm like, what could he eat? And to take that relationship that's so innocent, like the brother just is always, they often catch him and Nolan in his little brother's room, peeking and climbing up on the little bottom bar of the crib and like, trying to wake him up and playing with him and stuff. To take that image that she and Dan have seen so many times and to have such a different outcome, that like, even to me writing it, I was a little bit like disturbed. Um and so yeah, that's how we came to it. I basically put myself in the worst situation and I was like, okay, well, what would you do? And if that is what would happen like to me, if that is something I experienced as like a human, first of all, I write a lot of things. I read a lot of things. I was like raised, like steeped in like supernatural and horror and everything like that, urban legends and all that stuff. But if I actually saw something like that, I mean, I'd probably be one hell of a better writer. Like I'd improve so much with my dark craft, but I don't think I'd ever be able to be mentally the same in my head ever again. Like this sounds horrible and I'm sorry. Trigger warning. Trigger warning. I'm gonna count to 5. It's bad stuff. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. You come in the room and like God forbid you find your small child, eating the family pet. That's terrifying enough as it is, but ultimately you get through it. You get the kid therapy. You take him to the doctor to make sure he doesn't get sick from whatever he ain't. I mean, keep an extra eye on little Dahmer there, but like to eat your other child. I mean, she already lost one to whatever ungodly world he went, and now her other child is completely gone. she's not going to be able to give any of herself to her husband. They're not going to be able to pick up the pieces and move on in her mind. She loves him, and the only way that she can best help her husband to move on is if she removes herself. She's never going to be happy in life until she's with her boys. So at the end, that's why she decided to make the decision that she made. Like I said, it's a really wholesome story, but it's so messy.
Right, it's a fucked up Hallmark story.
Yeah, like goodness gracious.
Yeah, that twist. I don't know if you call it a twist, but her decision at the end just floored me, and it made almost like a poetic sense, as you're saying. Like she just wanted to return back, to the family, basically, to have her boys back. And how else to do that? You give yourself to your child, and as parents, we're so. Not wrapped up, but we're like, our kids are extensions of us, up to a certain point when you realize that they are really their own independent person. You have to treat them as such. But when our kids are so little, they're an extension of us. So yeah, if your friend went out and became a cannibal and did whatever, you don't feel bad about yourself for it. But if your child does that, especially to your other child, it's got to stoke every just fucked up chord in your brain possible. That what did you do wrong that your children are eating each other? What is going on? I mean, that is horror personified. So you really, pretty sure that every parent that listens to the Grey Rooms puked at least once or twice thinking about the ramifications of this story. So you did a superb job.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I was so happy. I heard that the character, the length, and that the character they will die at the end of the episode. And I was like, man, I have a story that is perfect, because that's the only story that I have where the character actually like passes away. Like her final thoughts are actually on the paper. She's dying and she's thinking, okay, well, my husband's going to come home and he's going to have to deal with whatever the hell this is that took over our child. He'll understand why I did what I had to do. He's a very understanding person, which is a line that came from the beginning of the story when things were a lot happier and a lot was going their way, and they were forging, living the American dream as a family and making their dreams come true after challenges and setbacks. And, like character development to me is very, very important in writing. And I think that's why I put so much of myself into this one. And even with Nolan, the way that we named our children is we named them all Celtic names that end in the letters A-N. And if we ever were to have a fourth, which will never happen, but if we ever were to have a fourth, he would be named Nolan. So I was like, okay, well, there you go. We'll use it. So, yeah.
So this story is your fourth child, basically.
Basically, and that explains right there why I can't have more than 3. I'm happy with 3. And we're good. And the third child that I was pregnant with, that I listened to creepypastas and podcasts through his entire pregnancy, came out the wild child of all of all 3. He's the craziest. So, yeah.
Well, and also something else you touched on, I think. I want to use the word changeling. Is a changeling kind of like that that trope of like the kid that comes back but is not your kid but pretends to be your kid? Like,
yes.
So that's what it kind of stoked that. So I mean, clearly that's like a cultural and a societal thing, because I've heard that kind of story over and over again. But it's not just authors copying each other. It's kind of just like something as humans that we've probably been afraid of. Like, we love our children so deeply, unconditional love, as you said. So then what would be the opposite of that? Like, just completely unconditional fear of your child because you have absolutely no idea what is going on with your child. Like, there's so much room for horror, I think, within the relationship between parents and children, and that's been used countless times over the centuries. So that's probably where the idea of the changeling came from. So you really effectively, to me, in my mind, my opinion was that she went to that flea market, and like you said, like, she got the boy back, but she didn't get her son back per se. It was some other entity. So to me, it was like a changeling. And you even did the little nuances of like, he said mama instead of mommy, just the little things that were different, like a blip in the matrix, allowing the mother to see maybe the reality, even though she didn't want to accept the reality.
Yes, she keeps saying, well, maybe he's getting older, and Nolan was her first child. So she doesn't like, with my eldest child, he just turns 11, and all of the challenges that he will face and the little 11-year-old problems that he has. Sometimes it's hard for me because I've never faced these problems. Like, these are new for the both of us. By the time his brothers will turn 11, I'll have been around that block before and I'll somewhat have my footing. But with my eldest, it's new ground for both of us. So like it's it's
Yep.
really it's still it's challenging. And then plus you have to factor in their different personalities. Like Logan, who Nolan was like in the child, his little characteristics and stuff was inspired on. He wouldn't eat meat at all. And then my eldest child, before I had my third, would not eat vegetables. And like, you think it would be easy. You just make a 3-course meal and then you give one the meat and one the vegetables, but it didn't work that way. I would have to make like 3-4 dinners at a time. My friend from Colorado stayed with me this year for a couple months. And she's like, I don't understand how you can cook a different meal for all the kids and then one for you and your husband. Like, I wouldn't be able to do that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, what else am I going to do? Like, they're not going to eat. And sometimes, that's not the best way. But that's also what inspired, the line in the middle of the story about how he waits patiently. Well, not so patiently at that scene, but because he always knows that she cooks a meal for him and then a separate meal for Dan and herself.
Yeah, and why is food always this pivotal struggle between parents and kids? Like, I mean, I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they would eat anything growing up, but god damn it, I cannot get them to deviate. You mentioned earlier, if it's not like a chicken McNugget or something, like they will only eat like 4 staples, and it's just next to impossible to get them to appreciate, no matter how I dress it up or hide the food or whatever. It's so impossible to get them to try new things. But ironically, just the other day, because I am a huge fan of meat and I love cooking meat, I do a lot of pan frying. Cooked up some juicy pieces of steak, and I, seasoned it to perfection, and I convinced my kids that it's got to be a carnal thing, because regardless of the fact that they'll hardly eat anything, I'm cutting up this big hunk of steak for them, and both my daughters tried a piece, and they loved it, and they ate more. So there's something about kids and meat. I don't know. Once they get that taste, it's over. They just want it, whether it's a cow, a chicken, or their little baby brother, I guess.
Right?
So, do you write other horror stories for any anthologies or not? Like, what is your scope of dealing with horror as a writer?
Well, I actually, when I started writing in 2019, I wanted to learn everything that I could. And I joined a Facebook writing group that was very, very active and very supportive. And I'm still with them. I'm actually a moderator of them. So like, this isn't negative. This is just explaining my process, my journey. They had all of these amazing anthology ideas and I was inspired. So I was already listening to all the podcasts, and now I was actually speaking to people that were on them, like on YouTube creepypastas, on the, the podcast and stuff like that. And it was just, I had an idea for an anthology of my own. I wanted to do an insect horror anthology because I live in Florida, and like some of the palmetto bugs here are like the size of your wrist, and it's like, it's gross. Like, it's ridiculously gross. There's so many bugs here. Spiders as big as your face. I mean, it's not as bad as Australia. For the United States, it's pretty gross. And I live in the deep woods, so that doesn't make it any better.
It just makes them bigger.
Yeah. I was kind of, I don't really want to say pushed aside, but I was so new, and these were all like men, and I'm not trying to bring the gender divide into this, but it is been noticed by me that the ratio of female podcasters, narrators, and writers is a little bit lower. There's not as many of us as there are of men.
I agree
So
with you. Yeah.
my idea was kind of pushed aside. They're like, oh, that's so cute. Well, we don't have time for it right now, but maybe in the future. Okay, run along now. Bye,
Oh,
honey.
fuck them.
Thank you. And so I was like, oh, hell no. So I'm like, okay. I researched everything. I started writing a lot more. I did a bunch of collaborations with everyone. I think in 2019, I participated in over 52 multi-authored anthologies that were published. And then I ended up me and my partner, Melody Grace, ended up opening a publishing company in July. And so we've published about 13 anthologies ourselves. So
This was
I
July of
wanted
2020.
no, it was July of 2019.
Okay, 2000. Okay, so before the pandemic. Okay, I was going to say you
Yeah,
stayed busy during the pandemic.
No, I did not. I mean, I did, but like my writing kind of tanked to focus on teaching the kids at school, at home, homeschooling and stuff. But I wanted to be involved in everything. I started making relationships with other podcasters, narrators, authors, and I've come quite a long way. I've done quite a bit with my writing that I'm happy about. I am a proud submissions coordinator for the Creepy podcast.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, I'm very, 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 very happy there. I've been with them for 2 years. So yeah, I understand. I wanted to get into it. I wanted to dominate it. I wanted to understand everything. And I mean, even if it was something I don't use, like I learned video editing, sound editing. I got Adobe Audition to understand, recordings. Obviously, you and I saw earlier how that worked out with my microphone that crapped out and caused a 15-minute delay.
It's okay. Happens to the
But
gray
I
rooms
know
all the
how to
time.
do it. I have the knowledge. The technology is just ignorant. That's what it is.
There you go. Well, and it's beautiful too how there's no instruction manual on how to make a good podcast. It's everyone's opinion telling each other on how they make their good podcasts. But really, podcasting is so beautiful because it's like you're saying, it's about community and connecting with new people and collaborating and working together with people. Like I just basically just named a bunch of synonyms, but it's a beautiful process of shoulder to shoulder. I feel sums coming or parts coming together to make a bigger sum. And you've got in with some great people. Like I know John and Steve from Creepy, and like if you're working with them, they're amazing, inspirational people. And again, there's no instruction manual on what we're doing, but when we do it right and we can share those right ways with other people, it's just all leading towards a bigger and better garden of horror stories, I guess. But we're all tending to these trees and growing them together, basically. So I love hearing these stories. And you mentioned Scott Savino earlier before we started recording. How are you, friend? How do you know Scott?
I joined this beautiful, big, welcoming family of horror authors. And some of my best friends are horror authors that I have never met that live hundreds of miles away. And especially with the last year, everybody being, so close at home for everyone's safety, traveling to meet them wasn't an option. Scott Savino, however, lives close to me, like super close. I mean, not as close as I would like to think. It'll be raining here, and I'll say something to him, and I'll be like, man, I'm sorry that it's raining for you today. And he's like, you are so crazy. He has to send me like little maps of the state of Florida. And he's like, you are here and I am here. It's not raining over here. But I'm close to him because we've actually met each other. We've had lunch together. Like he's a really, really close friend. And I gravitated towards him because he is our location. We understand the same things. We go through hurricane seasons together. Stuff like that. So yeah, he's a very, very amazing, author. He's actually the one that pointed me in the direction because I was a fan and listener of the Grey Rooms podcast, but he got accepted with his latest story got accepted, and he told me all about it. I think the one about the bees.
Yeah,
And
the honey of revenge.
yes, his excitement was so infectious. And I was like, I wish that I could get on there. And he's like, girl, you can. And I'm like,
He's
no.
infectious. His personality is amazing. I love Scott Savino. Yeah, he was a great person to chat with. He's so dialed in to just how all the shit works. He's a phenomenal dude.
He is so great. Like we have had he's just a person that we could have like bad days and we'll just like call each other on the way home and be like, man, you would not believe this crap. And it's like really, really good to have somebody, because all of my friends here at home and like my family here at home, they're into horror, but they don't understand. And like I call it's so silly because I'm so grandiose, but I call it the industry. They don't understand the industry. And it's really, really nice to have friends and to meet new people, and become acquainted with like people like yourself, and like to have friends like Scott in my corner that understands, like, oh, my I'll have my sister and she's like, you're kind of sad today. What happened? Oh, well, I have writer's block or I got a rejection. She'd be like, oh, that's terrible. And then we'd move on. But, because she doesn't really understand. But like people in, my kind of industry and my genre, they're like, oh man, well, what do you think happened? Do you think it was them? Do you think it was you? Are you going to tweak the story and try to submit it somewhere else? Like we're always trying to lift each other up. It's really nice. It's not a community of like, hey, look at my stuff, look at my stuff, look at my stuff. It's like we're all asking, hey, what are you working on? What are you working on? What are you working on? We share submissions with each other, which is how I was able to submit to so many in 2019.
The No Sleep podcast does like like a book club, and I was more active in it years ago, and I've mentioned this before, but to see that camaraderie between new writers and old writers and people encouraging each other, and like you said, someone that had writer's block and others coming in to encourage them on new ideas on how to move forward with their writing, and not even just that, but just the support in general and where to go with your writings, who to talk to about getting published. Like it's so beautiful to see this community. I call it, you call it the industry, I call it the community. Same thing.
It is. I guess I'm very, 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 I don't know. I don't want to say that I take it too seriously, because like we all do. This is all why we're here. Like all of our hearts are put into it. But I am a legit like workaholic. I had an interview the other day that asked me, well, how do you find your urge to write, or find yourself? And I was like, I always want to write. I always want to work. That's my problem. I'm always ready to do things, but I have 3 little ones and a husband who works very, very hard. So I can stay home with them and, we can all have the things that we need. So I don't always have the ability and time. When I first started writing, my youngest child was like severely easy because, he was in utero for part of it. And then the other part, he was teeny tiny. But once his toddler years hit, just happened to be around when the pandemic hit. So my writing, I think everybody's productivity took a little bit of a change, whether it be positive or negative.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And podcast listener, like I was a voracious listener of podcasts prior to the pandemic, and I sat in an office all day long and could have an earpiece in my ear while working. And then now working from home, I can barely find the time to listen to my own podcast. Like it's, like you said, everything has been upended, and people who didn't do things are doing things now. People that did things are not doing things now. And we're all kind of reforging, basically. We're just using the old metal and just forging it all over again into something newer and better. So I'm really hoping like all the new relationships that have been, coming together over this pandemic continue. This is kind of maybe the renaissance. I don't know. This is like horror community 2.0. I mean, I don't know how to label any of it, but despite the negatives, I am very hopeful because of the positives that I have been seeing, in this community. So it's great to have
absolutely.
it's great to have you aboard the Grey Rooms now. I am so excited every time to say, hey, you're a part of the canon now of our overall larger story, that's unfolding here. And your story just, can't wait to cook some steak tonight. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. I am smiling so large. I'm a smiler and nodder, an audio smiler and nodder. So I'm just letting you know, I'm smiling so big. Thank you. That makes me so happy.
What did you think of your story? Like you told me personally, you've listened to it like 16 times. So like, what did you think those 16 times of the story?
I loved it. First of all, for what I heard, the little child voice, and I was like, oh my God, like that, the attention put into the audio production and the detail is impeccable. And I mean, I've listened to it. I've written for podcasts. I have helped release podcasts. I've done audio editing, and like it blew me. And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn. I'm just saying with my level of experience, it blew me away. Like my husband is the manager of a taco shop, a Burrito Works taco shop in the tourist section of the town that we live in. And I let him know that the episode was out, and we listened to it long distance, like together. He was at work and I was at home, but he put it on right at work. And luckily there weren't that many customers in there. But yeah, his the other manager there heard it, and his employee heard it, and they were like, "Oh my God, did your wife write that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "That was really, really, really good." And Sarah, the narrator, I've worked with her before. She's narrated my one of my stories before for the No Sleep podcast. And so I felt like it's so weird. Like there's so many levels of like, even though I've been writing for as long as I have, every time I speak to somebody whose voice I hear on a podcast, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity. Like,
well, we are celebrities. Come on now, Sarah Ruth Thomas. She's totally a celebrity.
Absolutely. But like when someone narrates my work, I feel like they're my friend. Like Sarah Thomas probably, well, she knows who I am at this point because she's narrated 2 of my stories. But like because I fell in love with her voice when she narrated my story before, and to have her come back again and narrate Nolan was just such a pleasant surprise. Like I already loved her inflection and like everything. I don't have an inner monologue, and we're not really going to get too much into that because that's something that I could talk about forever because I don't have a filter. But her voice when I was listening to it would have been exactly how it was inflected in my mind. Like the way that she reacted, the quavering of her tone when she realized certain things were going on, the love that you heard that she had for the children. It was so incredible. I was so pleased. Like I loved it so much. Like, oh my goodness, Sarah, if you were listening to this, thank you so much. You were amazing. I feel so honored to have got her attention more than once. Like, that's crazy. Lightning doesn't strike twice, but in this case it did in the best possible way.
Yeah, she's such a versatile actor, and like you said, like the way that she handled this story with the inflection, like I just thought I was listening to a mother tell a story. There was no like, she's really good at acting this way. No, it was just like, I'm listening to this woman who's a mother telling her story about her cannibal child, and it was she's so great, and she was our season 2 antagonist because we also have the narrative story on top of all these anthology stories. But yes. I mean, I knew of her long before she joined us with the Grey Rooms. I knew of her from No Sleep podcast as well because I'm a huge No Sleep podcast fan, and I right away took to to her voice. I think Aaron Lillis was the first actor that I was just like, oh my god, nobody's better than this person, nobody. And then Sarah Ruth Thomas came along. I'm like, okay, so the two of them are really fucking awesome. No one is better than these two. And I have always, hands down, I will pick Aaron Lillis and I will pick Sarah Ruth Thomas as my absolute favorite podcasting actors, just because of, like you said, how they handle each story. They can be good, they can be bad, they can be happy, sad. Some actors, they're good enough, and they can portray the characters. But like Sarah Ruth Thomas, she really just became the character. So
yes, it always, and it's silly, but it does kind of make sense, especially since I wrote the story so long ago. It was one of my first. That the production team and the podcast and the voice actors and the sound effects and the music and everything does such an amazing job that midway through listening to it, I forgot that I fucking wrote it. Like, I got so sucked into it. I'm like, what? And then I was like, I had to like step back for a second, and then I was like, oh yeah, I wrote this. Like, this,
beautiful.
So that it makes me so happy when that happens. Like, I get so into it and I'm like, man, I wish I could come up with an idea like this. Oh, wait a minute.
I did.
So yeah, it was a really, really wonderful job. It was everything that Scott Savino said it would be and more. Thank you, Scott, for giving me the confidence to submit, because I was scared.
And Jason Wilson, who is our podcast creator and he produces everything. The child was his son. So hey, we have a future horror actor in the midst here, and you helped give a script for him. So good job. Perfect
little voice. Like the sweetest, most angelic, the voice that you can think of. I think he runned it away. I'm so happy that they had that sweet little boy pronounce that word wrong on purpose, because that was like a big thing to me. And I heard "runded" and I was like, yes.
That made the story so believable, right? Yeah. And you wrote that in there, but like you said, someone could have fumbled that, and to have him say it that way, it was perfect. I kind of did get lost in the story too. I told you, I just felt like I'm just listening to this mom tell this story. It didn't feel like I'm listening to a horror podcast, something scary is gonna happen now. It was a very just natural suck in. You just got sucked right into the story. So and the flea market that I love to take my kids to, when I wrote it, it was still there. But by the time the episode came out, it's gone now. Like, it's literally just an indention in the dirt. So like that was That's
extra
not scary
like
at
sweet.
all.
I know they took it away. They're going to put in like a car lot in a hospital, I think. But still, like, to hear that, like, oh my God, the flea market, it's gone now. So that was really, really cool. It made me really, it made my heart really happy, especially since it wasn't true. I got to the end of the episode. Everything was good. I gave my kids food that was socially and culturally appropriate for humans to eat. And then it was great.
For a second there, though, I thought you were going to say that like the flea market was gone, and then everyone told you that you were crazy because there had never been a flea market there. So I was thinking, like, no, that would have been a great way to start this story.
I did write a story about that, but that's for another time, and maybe I will. Maybe I'll submit that at a future date and kill off the character in that one. But I actually do have a story about that. So that's funny that you mentioned that.
Us horror nuts, we all think the same. Can I ask you then, what else have you written for? Like, what other projects do you feature on? Do you have anything that's coming out soon?
I'm actually, the Creepy Podcast is, and I feel bad saying this because like, I write for them sometimes. Like, you know how Olivia White, who is she runs the No Sleep podcast, she'll feature her stories on there. Well, for Women in Horror Month, the Creepy Podcast chose a bunch of stories to feature that were from African-American authors and from women to celebrate and honor Black History Month, as well as Women in Horror Month. And I wrote a story called Isolation that is it's a half-hour long when it's narrated, and John narrated that, and that will be coming out for on a Sunday episode, free for everyone to listen to sometime in February. And then I have a episode coming out February 17th of The Writer's Mythos with TJ Lee. I wrote a script with P.F. McGrail, otherwise known as Bifle's Disciple, on Shirley Jackson for Women in Horror Month. And that's been really fun to do. And that comes out the 17th of February.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so you're writing more than just horror itself. Yeah. Well, you did say, and you're also handling like submissions for Creepy too as well. So it's great that you have your hands in more than just one cookie pot, basically.
Yeah, it can get kind of challenging sometimes because I want to be known as an author that also does this. And the more I get involved in, the more I get scared that I will be a coordinator that happens to write or, like stuff like that. A publisher who dabbles in writing. No, I'm a writer first. And of course I take all my jobs seriously, but I want to make sure that I don't lose that part and make sure that that's in the forefront of everything that I do.
Right, of course. Well, and Olivia White is a great person to aspire to be like, because she like what you said, she's the writer, but she also does all the other things around it. Olivia White is a great human being, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
So, don't ever give up on any of this. Embrace this and always keep in you what works and what doesn't. It just doesn't work. Just cut it off, throw it away. That's it. It's just the extra packaging. Who cares? You don't need to worry about it. But you got this. You're doing great. I mean, I'm learning so much about you from here and realizing all the connections you already have. There's nothing to be worried about. Your future is solid.
Well, thank you. That really means a lot to me. I'm very, very. I've worked so hard to get where I am. And I don't ever want to stop. I always want to continue to learn more, help more, be involved more, because it's fun to me. And the old adage, if you work doing something you love, you never work a day in your life. That's totally true. And I'm really, really, really happy. It's not all sunshine and roses. Like I said, my toddler is a very, very crazy human being, but
they all are crazy human beings. What are you talking about?
Oh my goodness gracious. No, this one is, this one's feral, but he's cute. So he's cute and I love him and he's sweet, but he's feral. And that's okay.
Yeah. Hopefully it's a stage. Otherwise you're going to be embracing that feralness for a while now.
Right? I'm going to end up like the mother of Nolan, except for eating his brother. He's going to turn 17 and move into a hut that he made with pine needles and his own poop in the yard, like something. It's going to be insane.
I'm going to call you up in 10 years and just ask if that actually happened or not.
Oh, I hope not.
I mean, having a mother as a horror writer, you never know what you're actually doing to your children. We only know after time, so we'll find out.
Right.
Well, hey, can you, as we wrap up here, can you let us know where people can find you on social media? Where can they find you to read any of your stories if they're available online? Where can we find you?
Of course. I have a Facebook author page, which is pretty active. It's N.M. Brown's Sinister Stories. And then you can find pretty much everything that I've ever written on my index, which is on my BunnyB03 Reddit writing profile on Reddit. I've tried to transition my username several times and it doesn't work. So I just stuck with BunnyB03. That's where you can find me.
All right. It's so sweet. It's scary. I love it.
Right.
That's just the angle you gotta go with for some strange reason. Well, thanks for joining us tonight and sharing with us your succulent recipes. I appreciate you taking the time to sit with us, Natalie, and I thank you for sharing your world with us here in the Grey Rooms.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really fun. I always love, making new friends and talking to new people, especially about dark, delicious things.
That's what we're here for. We all appreciate that here. And as usual, the biggest thank you goes out to our fans and followers who listen daily and spread the good word of Bob. Don't forget to feed your children, or else they may get a bit hangry. Hashtag stay gray. Take care and enjoy your evening, Natalie.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you. And good night, folks. Bye.
Join us each week after every episode for another edition of Behind the Door.